Hey everyone, welcome back to another Global Azure session. So up next, we're diving into a topic that's all about making our cloud development easier, better, faster, and stronger. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Jerome Brown. So Jerome is here to show us how Azure deployment environments can help streamline our workflows and supercharge our developer productivity. So take it away, Jerome. It's really good to have you here.
Thanks for the invite and thanks for having me, Luke, and the wonderful introduction. And thanks to everyone who's here, who's taking time out of their Saturday to join in and learn about some Azure. I know we're sort of partway through the morning session, so if you want to get up, stand up, move around a little bit for a moment, so you're not sitting in your chair all morning, take the opportunity now as I introduce myself. So as Luke said, my name is Jerome. I'm a Azure Principal Consultant with Mantle Group. And my role basically is helping to solve problems with technology. If you want to connect with me on screen there's a couple of QR codes, one that will take you to my GitHub profile, the other to my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out and connect with me. If you've got questions, drop them in the chat and we can answer those as we go through, or alternatively save them for the end as well. And I think it's actually timed quite well to have this session, and thank you very much, Dylan, for your discussion of developer platform, because you mentioned at the end there, get started simple and start out with some templates. And this is really, in a sense, where Azure deployment environments come in. Because if you set up your templates to start with, deployment environments, and excuse me if I keep calling them developer environments, deployment environments help you to take that code and make it easy for the teams to deploy. So for those who aren't familiar with Azure deployment environments, basically that's a set of tools, and it's really based around Microsoft's Dev Portal configuration that allows developers and users of the system to deploy predefined environments. So someone's got to go and define the environments that need to be deployed, what they look like. That's building up the templates, as Dylan showed us in the last segment from there as well. And the great thing with these environments is they can be done in your infrastructure as code language that you prefer. So if you like Bicep, write them in Bicep. If you're a Terraform shop, use Terraform. If you use Pulumi, use Pulumi. If you're still in the dark ages and using bash scripts, go ahead and use bash scripts. All of these can be used inside your deployment environment, because in the end, in the back end, all that's really happening is Microsoft is spinning up a container for us to do the deployment and deploying it for us. But the best thing about deployment environments, and the reason why I think we should be using them more, is it provides really that self-service capability for teams that's more easily discoverable than traditional ways of providing teams with templating systems. So my background is primarily Terraform. I've written a lot of Terraform. I've written a lot of Terraform modules. And for those of you who have been in Azure and using IAC recently, you'll be familiar also with the Azure Verified modules. And so this is Microsoft coming and bringing some of these templates together in order to make it easier for developers to go and deploy. But finding them can be a challenge. Teams don't necessarily know that, hey, we actually have a whole suite of Terraform modules already built up, ready to go, so that if you're building the mythical 3-tier app, web end, middleware, database, you could actually come, stand the whole thing up really quickly and be able to then deploy and get that and be able to use that without having to think through it too much. And that's where a developer platform, developer portal, and Azure deployment environments come in. But in addition to the web portal, you can also use the Azure CLI to deploy. I mean, everything in Azure these days is being done via CLI, Azure CLI. And so we can actually provision these environments from the Azure CLI. So developers don't have to drop out of their standard workflow. They can be in their terminal, they can deploy an environment, and then they can go and deploy to that environment. Or if they're more familiar with the developer CLI is also able to hook into deployment environments, deploy them, and give the infrastructure and platform team the ability to have visibility and to manage those environments as we go forward. And this is one of the key things of deployment environments, is this ability for teams and both developer and platform to be able to manage them. And then because it's automatable, because we can use the Azure CLI or the AZD command line, we can integrate it into our CI/CD processes. And I'll show you that as we go through in the demo today about how we can actually provision environments on demand for pull request merging, testing environments, and then we destroy them once the pull request is approved. And so that gives us short-lived environments, which helps us from a cost perspective as we are working our way through everything. And so as we look into this, what are the key components of Azure deployment environments? So the key components obviously is we start out with a subscription from a back-end side of things. Inside that subscription, we have a Dev Center. Now, Dev Center is this portal first and foremost that Microsoft offer, devportal.microsoft.com, that hooks into these dev centers. And inside the dev center, we're able to specify tools for developers. So if you're familiar with DevBox, if you've used DevBox, you'll find that in your developer center. And within that dev center, we then have two resource types that we need to be aware of. The first is a project. Now, from a project perspective, this is really as you're starting to think, it depends on how your organization is structured, how you'll structure your projects. They could be in one side of things, as they could align to business units, for example, or even possibly applications within your organization, and that you define your projects, and the projects are where you grant access for users to be able to use the deployment environments. We then, inside our Dev Center, also create environment types. So this here defines, in a sense, what is the life cycle look like of our applications. This is where we define, we have a development environment. We have a user acceptance testing environment. We have a system integration testing environment. We have a staging environment, prod, pre-prod. However your organization operates, we can define different types at the Dev Center level that give us control over how things are going to work. And then what we do is we combine those two, the projects and the environment types, in a project to create a project environment type. And so this is where we're going to marry up our project, let's say it's an application, along with the environment types. So our core line of business application has a dev, a staging, and a production environment, let's say. And so we need the ability for developers to be able to deploy into individual environments. And maybe, again, within these, we have different requirements. So a developer should be able to spin up a new development environment of their own accord, but they can't touch production. But we want to make it easy for them to get in and find production and find the resources that make up the production environment. So we give them read access to the production environment, which gives them that visibility to be able to see it. And so we've got that configuration and that flexibility available to us. From those environment types, we're obviously then deploying a specific environment. And again, we get this overload of term from here. Deployment environments calls it an environment. I tend to refer to them as instances, because you could deploy multiple instances into the development environment, for example. This is quite common where you have developers working on their own version of the code, and you want the ability for them to be able to deploy their own instance, manage the life cycle of that instance, and be able to redeploy it in a situation where they've gone and completely destroyed the environment because they've had write access and they need to go back to a known state. And all of this is really easy to do within deployment environments. And then, of course, we have our users. They're synced from Entra ID, as everything in Azure is, and we can therefore assign them to those project environments, and they're able to get access from there. From an infrastructure on platform perspective, the key thing that we need to look at is the catalogs. So catalogs are where we define the tooling that's going to be available to a team. This is where we put our Bicep templates. This is where we put our Terraform templates, our Pulumi code. Whatever we're using from an infrastructure as code perspective, we store in a repository. That's GitHub or DevOps. We hook that in either to the Dev Center if it's something that should be available to all projects, or we tie it into an individual project if it's project specific. So maybe we have a generic environment for a sandpit configuration where people can come in and deploy a web app with a key vault and application insights and maybe an app config instance, so that they can tinker, play, see how all of that works, and then we destroy it from there. But inside particular projects, we need to have a defined environment, a defined infrastructure to match the architecture, and we want to be able to deploy that, maybe even with running code from beginning to end. And so that's where we have those different catalogs, and then we define them on the way through. So what does this all look like on the way through? It's easy to talk about it, but I know from my perspective, I learn best by doing and by jumping in. So let's jump into the Azure portal and have a look and see how they're configured. So in the Azure portal, if you go into and search for Azure deployment environments, this is the screen that's going to greet you. Links out to the documentation, help you get started, and explain what's going on from here. And as you can see in the left-hand side here, we've got our two key areas. We have our dev centers and we have our projects. And so in this scenario here, we've got ourselves our global Azure Bootcamp deployment environment or dev center that's been deployed. And so if I jump into here, I can see what's going on. We've got contact, who created it, how many catalogs are available, how many projects. It gives us all the information about what's going on from here. As I mentioned, we have in here our environment types defined. And within these, we can go, okay, this is our environment type, but we can then define what tags are going to be applied if something is deployed into this environment. This, again, is really helpful at this high level to go, let's make sure we've got certain tags. So maybe in production, if we have a production environment, we want to make sure our environment is tagged production. But maybe we've got backup tags that we need to have, specific cost center tags or similar. And so we can define those here as part of that. Again, depending on how you structure your dev centers and your projects, this is where you could, for example, add more cost tagging around business unit, cost centers, and so forth, if you've got multiple dev centers, to make sure that all the resources are meeting those requirements for the tagging that they should have from there. We then inside here define our projects, and for demo purposes, I've deployed two. One is a very generic one, and then one to sort of simulate a line of business app. So if we have a look here in our deployment environments project, we can come here and have a look at the catalogs that have been configured here. And so here we have two catalogs configured, both pulling from GitHub, and they can synchronize either automatically, or you can just leave them for a manual synchronization. Again, inside your own organization, you probably want to make sure these are being synced periodically. But if you're pulling from somewhere external, you might want a little bit more control over that. And so for demo purposes, we have the Microsoft Quick Start repository catalog loaded, and also the samples from Pulumi, just to demonstrate how we can use Pulumi versus Bicep versus Terraform for the deployment. If we come back here and have a look at our line of business application, again, we've got in here for our catalogs, we have our line of business app repository, and we'll have a look at this one a little bit more as we go through. In this situation, this is a Terraform repository. It's just designed to deploy an application to give us an idea of what it looks like. As mentioned, within a project, we now define our environment types. So within our environment type, when we want to create a new one, we first of all look back into our dev center to go, what environment type am I deploying out of my dev center? So we're left with only Sandbox. From here, we can select which subscription do we deploy into when we deploy to this environment. So again, as an organization for an application, you're likely to have at least production and non-production subscriptions. As we define the environment, we specify the subscription. Therefore, the dev teams don't need to know, where does this need to go? Where does this live? There's no risk of them accidentally putting the dev environment inside of production. In terms of deployment, the easiest way is to use a system managed identity, or what we can do is assign an existing user assigned identity. This is the identity that actually does all of the deployment work. So this is the one that you need to make sure is granted the right permissions over the subscription in order to be able to do the deployment and the configuration that's required. We can then say, when a user deploys an environment, what role do we give them? Are they allowed to have contributor rights to the resource group so that they can go and modify the resources on the way past? Do we give them owner so they can also do RBAC assignments, reader only so they can look, but they can't make any changes? Do we need to give them access into the database, into the storage? We can assign any of the standard Azure roles to the person who creates it. We then also can assign additional access. So look up a group and see, hey, from Entra ID, this group is going to need these permissions as well. So again, maybe from a development perspective, when it gets deployed into testing, let's make sure that the test team have access to get in and do what they need to. And then we can specify additional tags that will be applied to every resource that gets deployed. So this is what we get as we look at it in the Azure portal. So how does this look though for a user? So if I'm a user, I log into devportal.microsoft.com and I get here a list of all my projects or my environments that I've deployed. So in this scenario, this is my demo user. He's got user access to this project, so he can only see his own projects. So these are all the ones that he's gone and deployed. And as you can see here, we've got a couple deployed out of the deployment environments project, and we've got one deployed out of the line of business. As you can see, each of these is assigned to a different environment. So we have a couple in the demo environment and one in the sandbox environment. Again, that's tying into permissions, but it makes it really easy for me to come in here and say, you know what? I want to, where is my demo environment for our line of business app? We need to go and demonstrate to a customer what it is that we offer. How do we do this? We need to go and present to the stakeholders as part of our retro and as part of our agile ceremonies to show what it is that we've done. Here is the application as it operates. And it's a known quantity. We know what's there. Nobody can get in and fiddle with it. We can set expiries on individual environments as well. So either an environment can live permanently, and that's the default, or if I come in here, I can change an expiration date, enable that scheduled deletion, and decide, okay, I only need this through until the close of business on the 17th. So let me schedule it to be deleted at 6 p.m. on the 17th. And so that goes in, that marks it in the background, and then the developer portal and in the background will come along and actually delete that environment for us when we reach that end time. So again, a great opportunity to make sure that we're saving costs by setting those expiries on the way through. And then it's really easy to get to our resources. We can click on the link. That takes us into the Azure portal. And it takes a moment to load, of course. Here's our resource group that contains all of our resources. In this situation, we have a container app that's running here. We go into the container app. Here's our link, and I can click the link, and up comes our environment that has been deployed. And again, it takes a moment because container apps, and I haven't pre-warmed it, it's having to start it up in the background from there. And here we are. Here's our environment that's been deployed. And in this scenario here, I've just got it to give a greeting from here to tell us what environment type and name that we've deployed into. So this is information that's available to our templates. So how do I go about creating a new environment? So if I come back to my portal, I can create a new environment. And what's the name of that that we're looking at? And so let's have a chatty parrot today. And from here, I can select my project. So we've got the deployment environments line of business. We select what environment from that project I'm deploying into. And then we select our definition. So what we see here is some of these are out of the Quick Start and some of these out of the Pulumi deployment. And so I can pick, for example, a web application, enable the time that I want it to be deleted. So we're going to delete that on the 31st of May. And then I click create. It's as simple as that. That there gives me a new environment. How long does that take to provision? That depends on how long your IAC takes to deploy. And so we can scroll down. Here's our chatty parrot. and it's busy creating that for us. In the background, with a container's being spun up, the infrastructure as code is being downloaded, and it's being deployed into Azure. And so that's really simple from there. From an admin perspective, if I log in here as an administrative user, and we're going to have to hop through. The joys of MFA. Here, as an administrative user, I can see all of the environments that have been deployed. So here's our chatty parrot that we just deployed. We've got our chewy puppy, our hoppy rabbit, but we've also got a hyperactive sloth. Now, this wasn't deployed by our demo user. One thing I have noticed is that the portal occasionally, and was earlier this week, displaying the owner of the individual environments. It should be displaying that. Don't know why it's not displaying it for me at the moment. Thanks, Microsoft. But that, again, allows us to go, who's the owner of the environment? If it's been around for a long time, if it's an expensive environment, we can follow that up. I can have a quick look here. I can, as an administrator, redeploy. I can look at the deployment logs. I can find out more information. What catalog was it deployed for? What definition? What dev center and what project was it deployed out of from there? And we've got all of that information available to us really quickly. For a user, we've got all that information as well. So if the deployment fails, I can have a look and see what's gone on. Why did that fail from there? But that's all UI. That's forcing developers to come and hop into a portal in order to be able to do that. How can we make it even easier for them to do it? And that's where we can integrate it into our code from there. And so in this scenario here, I've got code here for the demo application that we loaded. What I'm able to do in this scenario, this repo hosts both the deployment code, the Terraform, and also a sample Go app that I've generated. And what I can do in here is come in here and I can create a pull request. So I come in, I create a pull request, we're releasing a new version. When I create this pull request, as you often do with GitHub environments, it will go and it will deploy for me. And because I've been testing it, it tells me it's already successfully deployed. I can look to my environment and see what's been going on. But here we have a deployment going in to our testing environment. So this is an environment defined inside GitHub. And that's going to run through, and that's actually going to do the deployment. So I can come over here to my create environment workflow. Come in here, we find our configuration, and this is now going to run off, and it's going to deploy into our dev center. In this scenario, because we're doing a pull request, we need to build our container and push that up into our container registry. We create our environment, and this will run through and take about 5 or 6 minutes to actually run through and deploy the application for us. But it's fully integrated into our deployment environment and into our pull request workflow. That's the key part, is we can provide these sample workflows or centralized workflows to development teams. And as long as they can provide the few pieces of we provide those pieces of information, and we do that via variables. So we think along the lines of what Dylan was doing in the last one. Here's our catalog item, dev center, project, subscription ID, and tenant ID for deployment. And we can define the client IDs and our subscription IDs, for example, based on those individual environments. Where am I needing to deploy all of this? That will run through quite happily from there. And there it is, creating the environment. So if I then come back to my developer portal and refresh here as my admin user, what we can see here is we're spinning up a new environment from continuous integration for our PR5, pull request 5, and we're deploying into the line of business code. That's going to run through. From here, I can go and I can view the resources. We can obviously find the resource details in our pipeline, post that back into the pull request. Once it's built, someone in the pull request can just click on the link, end up over at our application, and see how all of that works. So that's a quick overview there of deployment environments, how they work, what they are, where the benefits of them are. And the great thing is, again, from here, when I'm done, I find one, I delete it, and I don't have to think about going and cleaning it up. That will go through, that will do a Terraform destroy. That's the other thing with the deployment environments. If you're using Terraform, deployment environments will handle your state management for you. Your state files will be stored by the developer portal and deployment environments, so you don't have to think about putting it in a storage account, making sure you've got access to it, providing all of that. That's all managed for you from there. So that's deployment environments. As I said, my name's Jerome. If you want to get in touch with me, my details there for GitHub and for LinkedIn. Thank you very much for taking the time. And we've got a couple of minutes for questions if you had questions for me.
There's nothing in the chat yet about or any questions coming up, but you've touched a bit on it. But say I had, I don't know, application A, and it's got a container apps backend and then a web app front end, and I want to make changes to it. So I want essentially a similar version, but maybe I haven't committed those into main yet. So for example, I have a dev branch that I want to deploy before I commit that to main.
Yep.
Is it something you can do with development environments?
Absolutely. So within the configuration of catalogs, I tie it to a Git repository, but I can also tie it to a branch. And so this is where we can then surface in this scenario. If I add in here, for example, with dev, and we'll see whether it's going to play nicely with authorization, because it hasn't been in Edge recently. No, it's not. So I can pick where it is. I can edit, for example, this one here, and it's on main branch. I could go and say, please go to my development branch. And so therefore we've got that configuration. The downside of that, and this is where you potentially need to stage your projects well, is that dev branch and that catalog becomes available for deployment everywhere. There's no way to restrict what environment types it could be deployed to. In that scenario, you're probably better spinning up a project, connecting the dev branch into that other project, and then only providing yourself the development environment, again, to ensure that people aren't deploying the wrong code into the wrong places.
That makes sense. And then that goes back to good engineering standards as well, about where you use things and what things are called and all that.
Absolutely. And that's when, and same for then upgrading an existing environment, is it's not going to go and auto upgrade you when the latest environment version comes out. So when you've done that testing, committed that into main, your existing environments will stay where they are. That's where we leverage the redeploy. That will go and that will just redeploy the IAC in order to uplift it to your current version.
Cool. We've got no more questions, but where would people go if they wanted to learn more about development environments?
So the deployment environments, the best place to go is really to the Microsoft Learn documentation. So jump into your Azure portal, search for Azure deployment environments, and link out directly there from the documentation. The challenge is, as with a newer technology from Microsoft, the documentation is a little thin on the ground in certain areas, particularly when it comes to the requirements for deploying outside of the Bicep or ARM infrastructure. There is a little bit of documentation, but most of it is linking through to GitHub code in order to that you kind of have to pick through and find through through sort of the APIs and what all the specs are, and actually put something together. But there's certainly more content coming out from MVPs and others in the community as well. So that's the other place to start looking. But it's relatively simple. My encouragement is get in and have a play. That's the best way to do it. Start with the Microsoft provided templates. Bring your own templates and give them a go. It was reasonably easy to spin some of this up and get started on it. So
that's awesome. Thanks, Jerome. Thank you for talking to us about deployment environments today. And yeah, bringing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Luke. It's been wonderful to be part of the team and part of the Global Azure 2025.
Cool. Thank you.